Hello there, good evening. We begin tonight with an incredible rescue of 7 children and their teacher in Pakistan. They were on their way to school via cable car, a normal method of travel in a remote area. But when one cable snapped early this morning, they were left suspended hundreds of feet above a ravine, their lives hanging in the balance, depending on the strength of a single wire. Well, let's give you an idea, rather, of the geography of the area. The rescue took place in the north of Pakistan, in the Battagram district, where a cable car connects villages and brings pupils to school. It would take around 2 hours, 40 minutes to travel by car, a journey much longer than the 4 minutes by cable car. Well, military helicopters worked all day to try to bring the 8 people to safety, but as night fell, an even riskier operation began, with rescuers pulling themselves along a zip line. Our Pakistan correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports now on today's remarkable rescue.
In a deep valley, a sudden breakthrough moment. A boy appears to take a leap of faith before being pulled to safety. The hills around him filled with relief. It was an incredible escape, one of many to come. Here another child is winched away after a day of total despair, suspended in the sky. Their cable car dangled 274 meters above a ravine in Battagram in northern Pakistan. One adult on board called for help on a news channel.
हम 8 बंदे इधर लिफ्ट में मौजूद है, 8 बंदे, और वो एक बेहोश हो गया, उसके दिल का मसला था, वो अभी बेहोश पड़ा हुआ है।
वो बच्चा है जिसको जो बेहोश हुआ था?
15-16 साल की उम्र के थे। तो
आप क्या बता रहे हैं, उसका दिल का मसला है कोई?
वो पहले से दिल का मसला था, वो बात कम्प्लेक्स जा रहा था और अभी वो बेहोश हो गए। वो एक कम्प्लेक्स जा रहा था अस्पताल पे।
वो दिल की
रास्ते में ये वाकया पेश आ गया, वो बेहोश हो पड़ा हुआ है और हमारे और हालात भी बहुत तशवीशनाक है। खुदा के लिए कोई बंदोबस्त कर ले, ये सब लोगों को और इंसानी हमदर्दी।
As night fell, the air operation had to end, with 6 people still believed to be on board. Rescue efforts continued from the ground, though, and the Pakistan Army now say everyone on board has been freed. The car ran into trouble at 7 in the morning after a cable snapped and hung perilously on its side. Rotor blades risked destabilizing it, and rescuers were hampered by gusty winds.
But keeping in view the gusting wind and the strength of the cable, the downwash of the rotor, these are the 3 main factors which are creating a problem for the pilots to go for the rescue.
Many people use chairlifts in this mountainous region. Some are built by the communities themselves. And it is a community who supported the army to save the last of those trapped and no doubt terrified. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News.
A former Metropolitan Police officer has been sentenced to 16 years for rape. Adam Provan was found guilty in June this year for raping a fellow officer 6 times and twice raping a 16-year-old girl. There was harsh criticism from the judge, who said he was troubled by the way the Met handled the female police officer's initial complaints about Provan's behaviour in 2005. Rachel Venables has the story.
I was terrified. He was older than me, I didn't really know this man, and I just remember being against this tree.
Lauren was just 16 years old when a serving Met police officer lied about his age, took her to this park in East London on a blind date and raped her twice.
I don't feel like I was there mentally. I think my body was there, but my mind had gone somewhere else, and I feel like that was a coping mechanism to get through the trauma that I was, facing.
44-year-old Adam Provan's been jailed for 16 years, with another 8 years on extended licence, for raping 2 women on multiple occasions over a 7-year period. The first victim was a fellow officer who he raped 6 times in 2 years. In 2005, she told bosses at the Met Provan was harassing her, that he'd assaulted her, but she was told to leave it for the sake of her career. This is what she told the court.
The offences committed against me have impacted my entire adult life and my trust in police. I have lived in constant fear and an honest fear he would kill me.
Provan then stayed an officer for more than a decade and was free to attack Lauren Taylor 5 years later.
We've definitely both been let down in a way, but again, my experience is completely different, and it is really hard, I think, when you know that he was a police officer.
The judge said Provan had disgraced this force, but he also criticised the Met Police, saying they should be ashamed of the way they treated their female colleague when she reported him for assault. They said those officers were more interested in looking out for one of their own than in taking her seriously.
It means once more senior officers are having to apologise for the awful actions of one of their own.
Sadly, a small number of predatory people are attracted to this profession for the wrong reasons, and we must ensure we don't allow them in. But if they do get in, we must identify them quickly and root them out.
Why do you think in 2005, when a police officer reported Provan for a number of allegations, including assault, she didn't get the answers that she sought? She was told to leave it for the sake of her career.
I don't know at this time, and we must understand why, because I am so sorry. She deserved to be heard, for her case to be taken very seriously.
This case has yet again put sharp focus on the way complaints against officers are handled.
We've seen this pattern too often. Policing now needs to put a ring of steel around the profession to make sure that these men have absolutely no chance of entering policing in the future.
Scotland Yard are now working to identify if there might be more victims as they face yet again the reality of a serial abuser having worn their uniform. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
Well, our crime correspondent Martin Brunt joins us now. Yet more damage to the reputation of the Met Police, Martin, and more opportunities missed to catch a serious offender.
Yes, indeed. In his drive to root out bad officers, the Met Commissioner not that long ago warned everybody that there'd be 2 or 3 of his officers in court every week. I don't think any of us expected anything quite as bad as this so soon. PC Adam Provan's predatory sex crimes may not be as bad as those of PC David Carrick. Remember, he was jailed for life for 24 rapes earlier this year. But the Met's failure to stop PC Provan was just as bad, I think. There were several missed opportunities before he was caught, even in those early years when PC Provan was identified and questioned. Either there was no action taken, or he was warned about his behaviour, or in one case he was referred to an occupational therapist, or on another occasion the matter was, according to the Met, dealt with informally, whatever that means, and yet PC Provan went on to rape 2 women. The Met has said that it's reviewing his history within the force, but said we can already see there were key moments where we let women down and did not do all we could to support them. Now, the force is continuing to examine what it did and what it didn't do, but it's quite expecting to refer itself to the police watchdog, the IOPC, and that throws up the real possibility that some officers will face an examination of what they did or what they didn't do. So it does seem as though the Met's reputation and the lack of public confidence that goes with that is going to get worse before it gets better.
Martin Brunt, thank you. 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was found dead at her home in Woking, fell downstairs and broke her neck, according to her uncle. Imran Sharif is currently being held in police custody for questioning. He has not been charged and is not under arrest, but is assisting police in finding his brother, Irfan Sharif, who he claims he hasn't seen. Sara Sharif was discovered at her home in Woking after police were called from Pakistan by her father on the 10th of August. Police in Pakistan are seeking to arrest Irfan, who travelled to the country with his partner Benash Batul and another brother, Faisal Malik. Scientists believe prostate cancer could be more accurately diagnosed using MRI scans rather than an existing blood test. Despite being the most common cancer in men, there is currently no prostate screening programme. In the results of a survey of 300 men aged between 50 to 75, MRI picked up some serious cancers which would otherwise have been missed. Here's our science and technology editor, Tom Clark.
For 12 years, Errol Keller has been talking to people about prostate cancer. After getting the all clear for an aggressive form of the disease, he's campaigned at the garage he runs and through his foundation to persuade men to get tested, something he knows a bit about.
We men are not going to get ourselves tested, right? For me, it's like, you know, not taking your car for an MOT. So if you're going to take your car to have an MOT, why do we not have the same attitude towards our bodies?
Could the MRI be the new MOT for the prostate? Latest research finds MRI scans were significantly better than the current PSA blood test used to spot the cancer early.
The UK has a prostate cancer death rate that's significantly higher than other countries such as France, Italy, Spain. So we need to do something to address that. And we know that the blood test on its own isn't as accurate as we need it to be. So this is a way forward to help us with a refined prostate cancer screening approach.
A much larger study is needed to prove MRI prostate screening is clinically and cost effective, but it offers important hope.
We know that over 52,000 men are diagnosed with prostate cancer in the UK each year. And sadly, of those, over 10,000 are diagnosed too late when it's already spread. So if we could have an effective screening program and potentially utilise MRI imaging, for example, to detect those cancers early, it could have such a huge impact on those men.
A national screening programme would save many lives, but more men need to come forward for testing, say experts, particularly those of black ethnicity or anyone with a family history of prostate cancer.
You do not have to die of prostate cancer. You know, prostate cancer is curable if it's caught early. So it's important for all of us to get involved, especially when something new and exciting like this, right, arrives on our table.
A larger study to test the potential of MRI as a national screening tool for prostate cancer is already underway. Tom Clark, Sky News.
The international trading bloc known as Brics has gathered for 3 days in Johannesburg, where its members are discussing expanding the group and the war in Ukraine. Russia's Vladimir Putin appeared virtually at the summit because of international sanctions banning him from travel. His appearance comes as there's renewed competition as the expanding group countries want to break free from perceived constraints from the West. Sky's Africa correspondent Yusra El Bahir reports now from the summit.
Sandton, Johannesburg, the economic capital of Africa, and home to political leaders from 46 countries around the world for the next 3 days. Here for the 15th BRICS Summit. Russian President Putin's attendance is blocked by his International Criminal Court arrest warrant. It's a big year for BRICS. 40 countries around the world have shown interest in joining the 5-member bloc. 23 have made formal applications. This is the third round of South Africa hosting, and the first to come with the diplomatic nightmare of whether President Putin should or could legally attend.
His Excellency President Vladimir Putin.
And though virtual, his presence is met with cheers of defiance.
None of the terms of the so-called deal concerning the lifting of sanctions imposed on Russian exports of grain and fertilizers to world market have been fulfilled. Obligations to Russia in this regard have been simply ignored.
He may not be here in person, but he's definitely made a strong statement against Ukraine. And it's in his interest that more countries do get accepted into BRICS to help him offset sanctions. Less than 24 hours before Putin's message aired in Johannesburg, Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin shared his first video message since his halted protest march to Moscow. The man formerly known as Putin's chef says Wagner is making Russia even greater on all continents and Africa more free. a well-timed advertisement shared just as Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov prepares to enter closed-door security meetings with many leaders from across the continent. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News, Johannesburg.
The toll that drug addiction is taking in Scotland has been laid bare again today. The Scottish Government has welcomed a significant drop in the number of drug deaths, but there's little cause for celebration as Scotland continues to have the worst figures in Europe. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis has this report.
Life's ruined.
In the depths of a street Valium addiction.
Like £50 a box that I was paying, so I was spending over £300 a week.
Alive to tell the tale.
30 a day, which is like, you're only meant to take 8 a day. So it was, and then when my addiction reached its peak, I was taking 60 a day, and that went on for over a year. So I was lucky that I wasn't dead.
Very nearly a statistic in a country gripped by crisis.
You know, it's really soul-destroying watching somebody just waste away in front of you. They're basically killing themselves. It was just horrendous, is the only word that I can think of. It just was a living nightmare.
1,051 people died.
The latest death toll lays bare the human tragedy.
The total of European cars.
A depressing rhythm, the annual drumbeat of lives lost. This drop in deaths is far from a victory. The tide is far from turning, according to those battling this war. But here on the front line of Europe's drug epidemic, substances continue to be sold within seconds. Deadly cocktails of drugs wreaking havoc on communities like this one, who have to pick up the pieces.
If you're living in a scheme, you don't really have the choice. You know, there's no avenues of social mobility left. There's no educational avenue. There's no economic avenue. There's no sort of kind of employment avenue out of that kind of desperation.
Government ministers say residential rehab is part of the solution, but campaigners say access to beds is difficult.
We are working towards getting 1,000 publicly funded spaces.
How many are there today?
That varies across the country, and we are working really hard to increase that capacity. But I think it's worth noting.
How many are there today?
I think we can't just focus on the beds. It's the fact that there are placements.
No, but do you know how many beds there are?
There are a significant increase in the number of beds.
The loss of life among women continues to rise, an unsettling trend for campaigners.
Coming into services that don't have that consideration for a kind of gendered approach might make it difficult for women to be able to access that service, particularly if it's quite male-dominated and there's potentially experiences of violence or domestic abuse.
The question is whether Scotland is now one step closer to shaking off the shameful record. Conor Gillis, Sky News in Glasgow.
Well, it's the biggest year-on-year decrease and could be the start of a step forward in Scotland's fight against drug addiction. But a clear link still remains between deprivation and drug deaths, with people in the most deprived areas 15 times more likely to die than those in more affluent places. Here's our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire.
Let's start with the grounds for optimism. These are drug deaths over the years, and if you look at the last 2 years, it does look like there is a sustained drop, not just a pandemic effect. That could be the start of something. But compare it to where we were all the way back in 2000. It's still a lot higher. It grows, it grows, it grows. It really takes off in 2013. Now, to understand why that happened then and where Scotland might be going, we can look at the types of drugs involved in deaths. This chart shows how many deaths were a result of different classes of drugs. And you can see that in 2013, it coincides with the rise in benzodiazepines, sedatives like Xanax and Valium. Now, opiates have always been the most deadly. They remain that today. But a rise in the abuse of multiple drugs at the same time has been a big factor since 2013. More than 9 in 10 drug deaths are caused by users taking a combination of more than one drug. But again, good news. We can see the drop in all those lines, and actually cocaine was the only main drug class to increase its contribution to death this year. So hopefully the start of a promising trend. But Scotland is still in a very bad place compared to other nations. Most European countries are between 30 and 90 drug deaths per million people. Scotland, all the way out there, 248 drug deaths per million people. If we go back into the data in a bit more detail, there's a couple of worrying trends hidden in it, like the differences between men and women. 26.6 men per 100,000 died last year of drug misuse. Now, compare that to women, it is lower at 13.3 per 100,000. But we need to look at the rate of change. Since 2000 over here, the number of men dying has tripled. The number of women dying has gone up 7 times. Or take a look at age. You might assume that younger people are more likely to die from drug misuse. But actually, we're seeing a drop in those younger groups, which is good news. For those who are 55 and over, the so-called train-spotting generation, here in blue, they're seeing sustained increases. If we look at the geography of the problem, there's more concern. Dundee has been at the epicentre for years. It's now just been overtaken by Glasgow. And that speaks to another trend, a growing inequality between the most and least deprived areas in terms of drug deaths. If you go over here on the left, these are the least deprived areas. And then when you go up along here, you can see the deaths are increasing along with deprivation. You see Glasgow and Dundee there. And the single biggest structural driver of problem drug use is poverty and deprivation. That's mirrored in the deaths from drugs too. So it is a complex picture because this is a complex problem and it's one that isn't close yet to being solved.
Tom Cheshire there. Now, Greek authorities say the bodies of 18 people have been found in an area of the country's northeast that was ravaged by wildfires. The Mediterranean country has suffered from numerous wildfires this summer, with 20,000 tourists evacuated from the island of Rhodes last month. Broadcaster Nicky Campbell has claimed a teacher at 2 Edinburgh schools abused children on a Savile scale. He compared Ian Wares to the disgraced BBC TV and radio presenter Jimmy Savile after giving evidence to the Scottish child abuse inquiry. The BBC Radio 5 Live presenter told the inquiry he was sexually and physically abused by other teachers while he was a pupil at Edinburgh Academy. UK government borrowing was lower than expected last month, but was still more than 4 times higher than a year ago. Monthly borrowing increased to £25.6 billion in April. That is up from £21.5 billion in March and £13.7 billion in April 2022. Official figures also showed that it remained the 5th highest July borrowing since records began. Behind the rise is the increased cost of servicing debt, as interest rates have consistently been raised to bring down inflation. Japan will begin pumping more than 1 million tonnes of contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean, despite objections from China and South Korea. It's 12 years now since a tsunami caused the meltdown of 3 of its reactors, and the nuclear watchdog has approved the move. But there's widespread opposition from local fishermen, and China has banned seafood imports from several areas of Japan. Our China correspondent Helen Ann Smith has this report.
In Tokyo, they took to the streets. The rain did little to dampen the disappointment. After a row lasting months, treated radioactive water will be released into the ocean. This is the Fukushima plant as it was in 2011. Battered by a devastating tsunami, the site of a nuclear meltdown. Today, it is largely cleaned up, but the huge tanks you can see, well, they are filled with thousands of gallons of water that was used to cool the reactors. Storage space is running out. And so came the announcement communities had dreaded, accompanied by meetings and a promise the release would be safe.
For decades to come, the government will promise full responsibility to safely accomplish the treated water release and the decommissioning of the plant. It will continue taking necessary measures so that everyone in the fishing community can continue their work with peace of mind.
The Japanese government has worked to address concerns. Prime ministerial visits and expert reports, including from the UN's nuclear watchdog, declaring it safe. But for fishing communities here, scientific reports aren't enough. The perception of risk is enough to do harm. And this is a place where they already know how it feels to have your livelihoods destroyed.
It has taken us 10 years to recover. If the nuclear contaminated water were to be discharged into the ocean, all the efforts would have been in vain. I am really, really concerned about it. I am afraid it will ruin our lives.
And And their fears are founded. Neighbouring countries angry and responding. These were the scenes in South Korea this month. While in China, officials called it selfish and irresponsible and banned all seafood imports from 10 Japanese regions. It had been a staple in markets like this. In addition to import bans, China has also said it will test all Japanese seafood for radiation. And while political animosity between the two might be hardening the line, there are serious concerns here, and it will have serious ramifications. Much of the area around Fukushima still comes with warnings, and much is still deserted. Many here feel the government does have questions to answer, perhaps about the science and the safety, but more about whether it's been adequately solved. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News in Beijing.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and Henry Hill, deputy editor of Conservative Home. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of The Guardian, their headline, 8 saved in Pakistan's Miracle in the Mountains. More on that and the other papers in a moment. Well, this is Sky News in just a moment. The press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. 8 people have been winched to safety from a cable car that was left dangling 300 metres above a canyon in Pakistan. A former Met Police officer has been jailed for 16 years for multiple offences, including the rape of a teenage girl and a fellow police officer. And researchers say a new breakthrough in prostate cancer screening could save numerous lives, with an MRI scan replacing current blood tests. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome to both of you. As ever, we kick off with the front pages. So let's start with The Guardian, reporting on the 12-hour operation to rescue 8 people from a stuck cable car in a remote valley in Pakistan. The lead story, as you can see, a hospital accused of fobbing off parents of Letby murder victims. The Express leads with a potential trade deal between the UK and India as Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch talks up the plans. The Daily Mirror interviews the parents of a girl who almost died in an attack in 1991 by the nurse Beverly Allett. They say they've been left traumatised by the Lucy Letby case. The Telegraph reports that the government has been blocked from overruling the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone, the ULEZ zone. A new world order, the FT leads on Chinese President Xi Jinping being honoured in South Africa as the Brics summit gets underway. The Eye leads on a fertility landmark as surgeons perform the UK's first womb transplant. That's also on the front of the Daily Mail. Their headline, Woman Gives Womb to Her Sister in a UK Transplant First. And The Eye, which called it a sister's gift. The Daily Star brings us more meteorological misery as it predicts more humid temperatures will bring an invasion of flies. Well, that's cheery, isn't it? Anyway, so don't forget, scan that QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch us. So let's bring in our guests then. Henry and Sonia. Sonia, let's kick off with you in the Daily Mail, if you don't mind. A story leading a number of newspapers. A UK first. A woman gives her womb to her sister in a transplant breakthrough here.
Yes, absolutely. So as you've just said, Anna, this is the first time such a transplant has taken place in the UK. There have been around 90 of these transplants internationally. Viewers may remember that it happened, the first one in Australia happened earlier this year. This is a very exciting development in fertility medicine. What happens is that a donor who's normally already had their children, usually got a personal connection to the person they're donating to, can donate their womb, the whole organ. In this case, it was from an older sister, aged 40, to her younger sister, aged 34, who suffers from a rare medical condition that means that she doesn't have a fully developed womb. And there have been women around the world who, after having had one of these transplants, have been able to successfully carry babies to term. So this is what very much what the 34-year-old younger sister is hoping will happen. And this is a form of fertility treatment. I mean, it's obviously still not going to be for everyone. I think you probably have to have a very strong personal connection to someone to donate your womb in this way, because obviously that might have health implications for you going forwards. But it can help women who can't get pregnant because they've got issues with their own womb, their own uterus. What's quite interesting is that you have to take, it's really major surgery. So it took around 9 hours to take the womb out of the older sister, around 9 hours to put it into the younger sister. Also, I've been reading up about this evening. You have to take immunosuppressants while you've got the womb transplant in you. So it's not a permanent thing. You have it while you conceive your children, and then it will be taken out.
Well, that's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? Because obviously immunosuppressant drugs have a really big impact on people's lives, as we know. So a 17, 18-hour operation, as the Mail puts it. The Eye, which is also leading on this, said each transplant cost £25,000. What is extraordinary about this is the complexity of this. You know, the blood connections, you know, in this major organ, which is supposed to give birth to a child, you know, with the strains that goes in the womb. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it?
It really does feel like science fiction, you know, when you think about medical science and everything else. This is one of the things that maybe I didn't think maybe would ever happen or think about happening. And it's the lifeline it offers people. If you think about it, if you really want children and you do have one of these conditions and you could adopt, or there are IVF, but IVF is very expensive and actually doesn't have a very high success rate. And this is transformational because it means that you can potentially, and we, you know, this is early days, we've only been doing these operations for a little while, we haven't seen the long-term health implications or whether there are any other complications, but potentially bear your own children. Now, it is very expensive. It's obviously still early days. There will be questions about how to make this available on the NHS, for example, if eventually it does become a mainstream treatment, or as mainstream as it can be, given how niche it is. And obviously there will be supply issues, because as Sonia said, you do need, I think, probably to have quite strong personal reasons to donate, given the complications of that. But nonetheless, in a world that's absolutely full of bad news, it's really nice to see so many papers splashing on such a hopeful story.
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, more than 90 womb transplants have been carried out internationally, including in Sweden, the US, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, China, the Czech Republic, Brazil, Germany, Serbia and India, with most involving a living donor, somebody who's also generous, as you put it, Sonia. So certainly keep an eye on that. And it's actually an embargoed story, so we'll have more coverage after the embargo from Sky News here as well. So lots more on that to come. In the meantime, I was reading off The Guardian. Henry, you take us through the pictures in The Guardian. 8 saved in Pakistan's Miracle in the Mountains. You know, these young kids who go to school by cable car. It's a much shorter route in this incredibly mountainous area. You know, literally hanging by a thread for hours today.
I mean, I don't even want to think about it too much. It's actually my worst nightmare. You know, whenever you go out, whenever you go to Switzerland, which I've done once or twice, and you get the cable car, I don't like heights. You know, the first time you go on, when it goes over one of those cliffs and suddenly you're suspended by what feels like a little bit of rope. The idea of being stuck dangling there for so long is absolutely horrifying. And then you read about the complications. They were taking people off by helicopter, and then there were high winds, so they had to abandon that, meaning that people thought they were going to be rescued, and then they were stuck again. Chilling. And yet, again, a happy ending. It's absolutely fantastic. They managed to get everybody off, including the teacher. And it is remarkable how you have communities like this where this, which, you know, the only one we've got in the UK, I think, is the Boris Johnson vanity project over the Thames, but there in Pakistan, it's a perfectly sensible mode of transportation when it works.
Yes, and once the helicopter couldn't take off, you know, a zip wire was used, painstakingly bringing everyone to safety, at great risk to themselves, working in darkness, as you can see from these pictures, Sonia.
Absolutely, and I think it's, you know, everyone in Pakistan and elsewhere around the world, because, you know, it's one of those stories that I think people follow closely, regardless of where it is, whether it's local or international. And I think everyone will be breathing a sigh of relief. I've actually been reading up about these cable cars in Pakistan this evening. It wasn't something I was aware of, but it's very common for there to be essentially locally built cable cars, like kind of homemade cable cars. Some of them are made from, you know, the cabs of trucks, for example, and they are quite dangerous. So there have been accidents on them before. Now, the reason that they get built is because you've got very remote communities. The children in this cable car were using it to get to school. It takes a journey that would be a 2-hour walk or a 4-hour drive, you know, because it's a very mountainous region, and turns it into a 4-minute cable car ride. You know, it's just not feasible financially or time-wise for children to get a taxi to their school. So you can see why these cable cars are being used, but there are a lot of calls in Pakistan tonight for the government and, you know, local regulatory agencies to do much more to check on the safety of these cable cars, which are relatively unregulated.
I'm going to move on again, front of the Daily Telegraph now, and the story of the former Met officer Adam Provan, jailed today for 16 years, and the brave woman Lauren Taylor, now 29 years old, who's pictured top right there in the Telegraph on their front page, who's waived her right to anonymity to encourage other victims to come forward. He convicted of raping her and a fellow police officer, with the judge roundly condemning the Met for their handling of that incident. Henry?
Yeah, again, we have a story about the Met where, once again, not only has there been an officer who was using his position to prey on women, but the Met have institutionally covered it up. Every single time one of these stories happens, this man has been jailed for 16 years. He's going to have another 8 after that on licence, which is a heavy sentence. But you read the story, and it's chilling. There was an earlier woman who came forward with complaints, not of rape, but of inappropriate conduct. That was dealt with informally, which obviously means that there was no record of it, and gave officers an excuse to turn a blind eye. And then he used his position to rape not only a female colleague 6 times, but then a then 16-year-old girl. And they found out that he had hundreds, I think over 700 female contacts in his phone. So, I mean, God knows what he would have done if he hadn't eventually been caught. Now, the Met is promising a review again, and it's saying all the right things about stopping predatory officers and having the right checks in place, but it is clearly a deeply institutional problem that these complaints are not taken seriously, and that there is a tendency for officers to rally round an officer accused. And I think the most remarkable thing about this story, where one of the victims was a police officer, is when you read the story, it says that they were looking, the police were looking after one of their own. Well, doesn't she count? Why didn't she count? Why is that where their loyalties lay? It's crushingly depressing. It's good that he's got justice. It's extraordinary courage that this woman has waived her right to anonymity, because it is important that people come forward. Because as that earlier dismissed or informally dealt with story shows, even if the complaints aren't as serious as, rape, they can create a pattern of behaviour. They can establish a pattern of behaviour that allows predators to be identified earlier.
Yes, and our crime correspondent Martin Brunt, explaining to us a little earlier that the Met Commissioner had said there'd be 2 or 3 incidents a week involving his officers, but nobody expected one quite so seriously so soon. And this is yet another serious incident where there've been clear failings, Sonia.
I mean, absolutely. What are women supposed to think when you hear about yet another serving officer who used his badge essentially to rape? And, the young woman who's come forward, who is, as Henry says, is so incredibly brave. She's talked about she was 16 at the time. This serving officer told her that he was 22. He was actually double her age, I think, so around 32. And she thought she was safe to go on a date with him because, she knew he was a police officer, and he took her to the woods and raped her. We've had Baroness Louise Casey has done her review into the Met and found, ample evidence of institutional misogyny, racism, homophobia. And as Henry has just said, these issues, this cover-up culture in the Met, where they sort of cover for their own officers, where they don't take, instances of this Met officer raped a fellow police officer, but before that, he was sending nuisance messages to female colleagues. These signs go ignored, and fellow officers cover up. And it's just, sometimes it's just hard to know what to do with an institution like the Met. It feels like it's kind of unreformable, because these cultures run very deep. And, you've got to have such a committed leadership to overturn this. And, you just don't see it happening at the moment. And I think it's really, really worrying, because the police in this country, they police by consent. And that relationship between the police and the communities they serve and the everyday citizen is so important. And we have to be able to trust our police officers, because they've got immense power over our lives. And every time you hear a new story about a police officer abusing their power like this, it raises serious questions, both about the red flags, but also about who's getting recruited into the police force. Because we know that while there are many good men and women who want to serve in our police force, roles that give police officers power over people's lives like this, they do attract abusers. Okay. And we know that the police do not have strong enough filters to filter them out when they're recruiting.
Yes, important story. Sorry to cut you. If I just want to squeeze one more in before the break, which is also the front page of the Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph saying it's found out two things. One, that if the government tried to block London's ultra-low emission zone, they've been told it would be illegal. The second one, the Telegraph can today disclose that Sadiq Khan's deputy urged scientists to alter a Lancet study that showed London's low emission zone made no difference to children's health. Some quite interesting reporting here in the Telegraph concerning the ultra-low emission zone plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we don't have a lot of detail about the attempt to interfere with the nature study, but I mean, that's obviously improper, right? Scientific evidence is what it is. You can make the case for the low emission zone on plenty of good grounds without actively trying to interfere with the evidence. And the fact that this has come out, I think, only undermines the mayor's case. On the government's advice, basically, the government does, in theory, have a power where it could veto parts of the mayor's transport plan if that is deemed to be in conflict with national policy. Now, when they say it's been blocked, what the government's had is legal advice saying, well, national policy is net zero, right? So where's the conflict going to be? The government can still try. What they've been told by their lawyers is they'll probably lose in court.
OK, fascinating. Henry and Sonia, stay there, both of you. Lots more still to discuss, including this story in The Times. Chinese spy targets UK officials on LinkedIn. That and more in just a moment.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, the chief lead writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome to both of you. Sonia, front page of The Times now, a story about a Chinese spy, a single Chinese spy who's using fake LinkedIn profiles to try to lure thousands of British officials. They even have his main alias in this story. So explain what this is about.
Yeah, so it sounds like this spy is incredibly prolific. It's a single spy targeting thousands of people who might have classified information that's relevant to China. So that includes, civil servants, security officials, academics and scientists. And what this spy has been doing has been setting up lots of different profiles under aliases. The story can't reveal his name because it would put UK intelligence, Western intelligence at risk, but he's been targeting them with messages, offering cash for them, revealing things like, candidates for the security services, for employment by the security services, offering things like all expenses paid trips to China in exchange for information. So it really shows the extent to which spy networks are using social media. And, this is at LinkedIn. A lot of people use it for professional reasons, for networking, to kind of make contacts, to get freelance work. And, the spies, as you might expect, and Chinese intelligence are very attuned to that and have been targeting people who might be able to give them information.
Yes. Henry, let's move on to sort of the fallout from the Lucy Letby case. First of all, we've got the Daily Mirror, who interviews a mum and dad whose daughter almost died in an attack by the child-killing nurse Beverly Allett back in 1991. The Times says that senior NHS managers should be regulated in the same way as doctors. And The Guardian says, has the parents of a newborn son who was murdered and his twin poisoned, said they repeatedly tried to meet the hospital's medical director in the Lucy Letby case, but were fobbed off, which they found shameful, increasing calls for a statutory inquiry. So, days later, we're still getting, changes of policy required and further investigations needed.
I mean, I feel like I could almost repeat half of what I said about the Metropolitan Police, right? There's another series of institutional failures. When you read about the Letby story, you read about the medical whistleblowers who tried to come forward, how she was effectively shielded. No, but it is clear that NHS managers did not think she was guilty, but they stymied investigations. They once actually asked one of the doctors to apologise to Lucy Letby. And what the Mirror has is actually, that was pretty much what happened in 1991. The NHS, once again, sort of covering it up. And the really interesting thing about this is all of those doctors, if you think someone's committing a crime, let alone a crime as serious as killing children, you can just go straight to the police, right? You don't need the sign-off of NHS managers. And what's fascinating to me as someone outside is the power of that hierarchy, it's called the medical model, where they felt they had to go through the hospital system, when instead what we clearly need, bare minimum, one, better management of managers, but two, take the managers out of the system. If staff have safeguarding concerns or let alone concerns about crime, staff should be empowered and encouraged to go directly to the relevant authorities without getting sign-off.
Yes, just a minute left, Sonia, to add your voice to this. Sir Keir Starmer saying there should be a statutory inquiry. Do you get the sense the government might crumble on this?
Yeah, I do. And it's very common, actually, for inquiries to be announced and them to be made statutory later on. We at The Observer called for a statutory inquiry at the weekend in our editorial column. I think it's really important. Statutory inquiries have the power to compel witnesses and evidence. And it's really important that this inquiry has that, because otherwise we may not get at the truth. And this is it's one of the worst things that I've ever read about happening in the NHS. A nurse being allowed to perpetrate murders against premature babies for a full year before she was stopped. There has to be a statutory inquiry. And I agree with the families, actually. And with some of the doctors, we need to look at the regulation of NHS managers, because this is not the first time where whistleblowers have been treated abysmally by the NHS and by NHS management. It's not across the whole NHS, but it's clearly a systemic issue within the NHS.
Yes, indeed. Doctors have the GMC, why don't the bosses? Thank you both very much indeed. Sonia, Henry, thank you. See you at 11. Here's the weather.
warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, showers around this week. Thundery rain will threaten parts of the south on Thursday. Before then, Wednesday will start mostly fine, if a little chilly in some rural spots in the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.